History of a Teacher by Famous Fault. Chapter 30. Fire. The building was badly taken care of. There was graffiti on the gray concrete, and half of the windows were covered with newspapers and cardboard. The others were either smashed or filthy. Each and every one of the small gardens of the apartments on the ground floor were flooded with weed. The furniture on the balconies, if there was any, was in bad shape, and the colors had paled by the sun and rain. For some reason, the small figure at the entrance had expected something better. Surely she had been told that he didn't like luxury, but this was even below her expectations. When she entered, she was hit by the scent of drain, rotten food, alcohol, and sweat. It was a sickening stench, and she hurried up the stairwell to get away from it as soon as possible. She didn't dare take the elevator, not certain of its liability. When she reached the door, she thought to be correct. She looked at the slip of paper. The address was correct. At least she thought it was. She took some deep breaths before she raised her hand and pushed the doorbell. It took a while before the door opened, but when it did, she hastily backed down. The man who opened fitted in with the rough surroundings, at least in her opinion. He was tall, blond, muscular, and had gray eyes. His clothes were dark: a black tank top, a long leather jacket with buckles and chains, high boots, gray jeans, and fingerless gloves. He under no circumstances looked friendly. In fact, he seemed rather angry. When she reminded herself of who he was, she took a step towards him again and straightened her back. "Are you Raphael?" she wondered, and looked him in the eyes. "Who are you?" he asked without bothering to answer. As he stared down on her, he crossed his arms and waited for an answer. "I'm Tracy, a friend of Rebecca's," she said quietly. "I'm here to help you get to the ministry in the first place." Raphael didn't reply. He just opened the door further and invited her in. Tracy gave a little nod as thank you and walked into the apartment, followed by the man who could be no one else but Raphael. The place was a large contrast against the neglected outside. It was stylishly decorated and very clean. What Tracy noted first of all was that it was impersonal. No pictures or other personal belongings on the table or windowsills. It was pretty clear that he had moved in haste rather recently and that he could leave at any time. Raphael walked into the kitchen and took 2 glasses from a cupboard. "Rebecca has only sent me coded messages. They have been brief and only left me with more questions. How are things at Hogwarts?"
"Rebecca is trying to see how far the line goes. If she keeps this up, she'll be expelled soon. She's giving the headmistress a hard time,"
Tracy said as she followed him to the kitchen. He filled the glasses with water and handed her one. Then he walked back to the living room and invited her to sit down in the dark brown couch. He was thinking tactical, she noticed, as she sat down. She was with her back towards the window, which left nothing to distract her other than Raphael himself. "Giving the headmistress a hard time?" Raphael wondered. "What exactly does she do? If Rebecca holds a grudge, she doesn't hold back."
Tracy laughed. "So I've noticed. She's pretty cruel, uses whatever means she can think of. She and the twins make for a frightening trio."
"She's mentioned the twins," was all Raphael said, and it took a while before Tracy understood that it was his request to tell him more.
"The twins went 7th year and have always been the pranksters of the school. When Dumbledore was still headmaster, they didn't cause real mayhem. Surely they joked around a lot, but it was all in good fun. However, when Umbridge took over, they didn't stop at any boundaries. But they do have morals. They didn't really harm anyone. Rebecca doesn't give a damn, though. She watches out for the students."
Tracy went quiet and then thought of the time when Rebecca had made several potions that she had poured in random people's cups at breakfast. Some students had turned invisible, others multicolored, others lost the possibility to remember anything which happened while under the effects of the potions, but most of them suffered a sudden uncontrollable rage. The school had been in chaos.
"Most of the time, at least. Just a while ago, she ignited a snowstorm in the teacher's lounge. Umbridge and 3 other teachers ended up in the hospital wing with frostbite and undercooled hands and feet. What Rebecca lacked in charms, they made up for. And what they lacked in potions, Rebecca made up for. They had left school now, though."
Raphael frowned, but didn't get angry like Tracy knew her parents would have been. They didn't know she had left school yet, and she was dreading the conversation. She sighed deeply.
"You aren't mad at her?"
Raphael shook his head. "No, I'm not." I meant a few words. That was the impression Raphael had left her in the short moment she had known him. She had understood that he and Rebecca made a good combination, effective in cases like these, and dangerous enemies. "Do your parents know what is going on?" Raphael looked her in the eyes. Did they know you weren't at the school? Why did you get leave, anyway?
Werewolves, Tracy whispered. The same reason as why Professor Muto can't stay much longer.
Raphael didn't even look surprised. Aren't werewolves accepted at the school? Tracy shrugged and took a sip from the water.
They were. Professor Dumbledore accepted all kinds of people, werewolves and all. I'm not the first one. Umbridge, however, would rather have had every werewolf marked and listed than made special rules for them, among those that they aren't allowed to be educated. Hadn't I left, Umbridge would have eventually kicked me out without any apparent reason.
And your parents? Raphael asked, ignoring the information on the werewolves. Tracy was impressed, and she appreciated it. The man was intimidating, but also safe somehow.
They don't know yet. All they know about anything is what they have read in the Daily Prophet. That is troublesome, since I can't tell them everything. I don't know how to explain any of it.
Tracy's shoulders sunk.
I am not going to tell them yet. I have to figure something out first.
Raphael looked troubled, but didn't say anything about it. How long will Yugi be able to stay?
Parents have gathered over 3,000 signatures demanding Yugi to leave. He'll be out soon, unless something huge happens, and it doesn't seem that way.
Raphael nodded. A sensitive subject. I've read the Daily Prophet. I was surprised by the hostility towards... You don't know his name?
It was more of a statement than a question. Tracy shook her head. No. For some reason, Rebecca never calls him by name when talking to any outsiders. I've never asked. It's obvious she doesn't want to mention it.
The Pharaoh's name was a sensitive subject, since so much depended on it. Now it shouldn't matter, but it simply isn't ours to tell. How much do you know? I don't think Rebecca would have said a word. Tracy explained to him about the books and scriptures Bill had found after the Tomb Keeper's decrease, and how Ron, Hermione, Harry, and Dean had started to figure out Professor Muto's secret. Then she told him about what happened in the Forbidden Forest and how she owed the Pharaoh her life. She also told him everything she knew on spirits and the extermination of them. Raphael didn't interrupt her once, but listened carefully. He didn't lack reaction to her words, but yet seemed to take a certain distance with them. He was being quite objective when she told him about how spirits were exterminated. What pleased her was that he didn't once ask how she knew that much. How much do you know about this weak link? Raphael asked when she was done. Tracy shrugged. I know who he is by name and face, but that's it. There are ways for me to find out more, though. Secure ways? He wondered skeptically. Naturally, I didn't come unprepared. I think I know most of what you need to know, and otherwise I have the means to find out. Rebecca and I made sure we could keep in contact without being watched. All thanks to Fred and George and their genius tricks, Tracy said and smiled. Do they know? Raphael asked wearily. Tracy shook her head. Everyone at Hogwarts knows that Professor Muto was possessed. So does every other witch and wizard in entire Great Britain. No one knows who he is, and frankly, they don't care. Possessing spirits are bad. The faster they're destroyed, the better. Only at Hogwarts there are those who doubt the Daily Prophet's words on the character of the spirit. This partly because of Professor Muto's reaction, and a great deal due to Rebecca's reaction. She openly told Umbridge that she didn't know a thing, and thus a selected few who can see past deeply rooted ideas have doubt. Fred and George are among them. They liked Professor Muto, and they have seen Rebecca's reaction to all of this. They don't know who he is or what he can do, yet they know something is off and are willing to assist Rebecca at getting back at Umbridge in general. Raphael nodded. Good then. Best for us would be if we could simply buy the puzzle back. Unfortunately, considering the great publication that's occurred around the Pharaoh, the worst thing they could do is lose the puzzle. He will most likely not sell it. He won't get away with it. I'll try, but we can't count on it. However, the promise of money is one many people would go far for. Someone who is only a little greedy can be manipulated. Having him postpone the process should be possible if he's as weak a link as you claim. I really hope we can do more than that, Tracy said. But he's greedy. Can we offer him enough? Raphael smiled for the first time that day. There was an organization called Vengeace. It is no more now. It was run by 4 people only, and was without a doubt the wealthiest company in the world. After the Pharaoh took effect on darts, the company vaporized. The money that was left of it, Val and Alistair and I split equally, which makes us probably the richest people this world knows. No one knows, of course, just like no one knew about the existence of Vengeace itself. Tracy raised an eyebrow and made a rather comical face. Is that why you live in a place like this? Raphael nodded. I feel no need of luxury.
Tracy threw her head backwards and laughed out loud. No, only the Terminator style.
Her laugh increased until she couldn't stop, and in that filthy building she felt more at home than she had at Hogwarts for quite a while. Raphael too laughed. It's a personal preference. As soon as the laughter died, the reality came back to the both of them. See, money isn't the issue, though I suppose the wizarding world and we don't have the same currency, Raphael said.
Tracy nodded. We can take care of that without trouble. Gringotts trades currency, nearly always large amounts of money for people who intend to stay a longer period of time. Getting into the ministry isn't that hard either. The problem is getting into touch with a weak link and make a deal without someone expecting anything.
Tomorrow we visit the ministry, not to make a deal, but just to look around. Is there any different way for us to get to the Department of Regulation and Control of Mystical Creatures? We have to get to know the area as good as we can. With luck, we just might find out where that special room is, Raphael said. I'd like you to point him out if we pass him.
Tracy smiled. Easy. I'm a werewolf. The Department of Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures could be my second home if I wanted. No one has more right to walk into that department than I do, especially since I'm an underage witch. Wolfsbane potion is expensive, and as long as I'm underaged, I can get it for free at the department. It wouldn't even be a cheap excuse. I actually am going to need them.
Raphael nodded and leaned backwards. Should I worry? Tracy did, however, not smile as he had expected.
I almost turned Rebecca into something like me. It were the beasts that saved her from me. I happened to be in the same room as her when I transformed, and there was nothing to hold me back. You should worry at all times, but the full moon is still a week away. Being a werewolf is horrible.
I see, Raphael said, and let go of the subject. Tomorrow morning, until then, you can stay here. Once we get back, you should take contact with your parents. Tracy wasn't going to protest. This was her opportunity to do what she could for the pharaoh to whom she owed her life. You should stop it right now! Rebecca hissed furiously.
No, don't try and stop me, Peter.
It's not just a question about being expelled anymore, Peter argued loudly with her. He'll whip you to shreds and he'll love it! Ours too! Rebecca was far from the only one causing mischief, and although Filch had permission to whip, he didn't get the time, since whenever he caught a student, different chaos surfaced. But Rebecca had teamed up together with Peeves, and those two together made an even more frightening team than Fred, George, and Rebecca had been. The main difference was that Rebecca and Peeves were a much crueler pair who didn't care for the safety of the students. Peter and Rebecca were standing underneath the stands of the Quidditch pitch, arguing loudly. Gryffindor versus Ravenclaw would soon begin, and the stands were filling quickly, but Peter and Rebecca didn't care.
Do you think I care?
Rebecca snapped at him with more a hushed voice than his. He grabbed her shoulders and shook her roughly. No, I know you don't care. You don't care about what happens to you, and you don't care what happens to the students either. If you go through with this, you could kill the players. Rebecca pulled herself loose and turned away, ignoring him. She could hear Madame Hooch order the captains to shake hands. She found a spot where she, unseen, could see the pitch and readied her wand. No, Rebecca, what the hell happened to you? He asked, sounding more scared than angry now.
Peter, I'm not a saint. I've never felt the need to be or will ever become. I will do this. It's a lesson they all need to learn.
She hissed as Madame Hooch blew her whistle. The game had begun. Please don't do it, Rebecca, Peter pleaded.
I'm going to do this and then leave. Yugi is forced to leave soon, too. Just imagine how much more peaceful this school will be when we leave.
Leave, Peter, Rebecca ordered him. To her surprise, he obeyed. He turned away and left. I won't turn you in. If you need help with anything, just ask, Peter said, dug his hands in his pockets and strolled away. Rebecca didn't feel entirely okay with what had just happened, but she couldn't find it to concern herself too much about it. This would crave all her attention. It was too bad that Peeves wouldn't leave the castle to help her. He liked it too much inside. She had, however, a vague suspicion that the castle would be in worse shape when she returned than when she left. The Slytherins had started singing, and Rebecca hesitated no more. She had practiced this on a lesser scale in the room of requirement often enough, but she was still nervous. She whispered a long line of incantations which set off the different potions which she early that morning had spread over the field. That was how the show began. The field started to burn. Not at randomly, but quite careful. The flames were low and of no danger, but they spread quickly in a decided pattern. In front of the teachers' stands, the words started to form in the fire. Teachers and students alike gasped. ignorant. Rebecca smiled. Things were working just like she'd planned. The flames disappeared and flared up again in different words. You know nothing. Rebecca leaned backwards and watched the show she had started. Closely, she noted the teacher's reactions, especially Umbridge's reaction. She looked angered. What have you done? You don't know who he is. Rebecca knew that everyone would know that this was her doing, but she had to get the message across. They had to know that what they were doing was wrong. She had talked to Yugi about it, and he was okay with letting everyone know who Atem was if they were to destroy him. Naturally, he knew that people would never be able to treat Yugi the same again, but Yugi didn't care. Atem can't be forgotten, not by anyone. You are one of the people who knew Atem best, and most fit to submit the message, had Yugi said, and that was what Rebecca had taken to heart. But what if he isn't destroyed? What if he comes back? Rebecca had asked. Yugi had simply looked at her and shook his head. I don't have that kind of faith anymore, Rebecca. I don't think he's ever coming back at all. Rebecca, however, did think they could save him and had decided not to tell anyone more than what she already had. They would know her fury, but not Atem's story. You left us in despair. The flames were gradually increasing in height and size. The Quidditch players had stopped their game and were hovering close to the teacher stands so they could get a look at the words written. Among the students, whispers emerged. Rebecca heard her own name once or twice. She didn't mind it, though. He's suffered enough. Whispers went through the crowd. What does that mean? And how can this be? We all suffer and my revenge will be sweet. Some second years started to scream. The first years were too intimidated or frightened to react at all. Umbridge stood up and demanded silence. Rebecca had to applaud Umbridge's timing. Things would take a turn now. The flames expanded in wavy patterns over the entire field and then flared up higher than the goals. It was a good thing that the players were flying above the stands and not on the field. A screeching sound came from the flames as they violently tore at the field, burning away the grass and consuming the goalposts. The fire represented her fury, and she was showing it at a point where no one would miss it. The entire school would know how angry she was and that she would not tolerate it. This world had destroyed everything she cared about. It was her right to destroy a little bit of this world. Professor Snape, Professor Flitwick, and several others did their best to extinguish the fire with several spells, but since the fire was magical and empowered by a potion, they did not succeed. They had allowed it to grow for far too long. Though Rebecca frowned, troubled, she expected the teachers to be able to put it out. If they couldn't, neither could she, and although she knew that the fire wouldn't spread beyond the Quidditch pitch, it would destroy the stands where many students were gathered. The fire wasn't supposed to be this large. She had practiced it a number of times, always with success. Why was it going wrong now? This was the last thing she wanted to do. She had wanted to show everyone her anger, but she wasn't angry enough to kill everyone. She poked to the student whose legs were blocking her view slightly. Get away, she hissed. Get to the school. The student froze a moment, then he bent down to look at who was talking, but Rebecca had already moved. She was poking at many students' legs, all telling them to get away, and then moving on swiftly before they could get a glimpse of her. Slowly the message got across, and the students were disappearing. Then she heard a familiar voice instructing a group of first-year students to go back to the house. It was Dean, who went from group to group, instructing them to go back to the school. He was focusing on the first and second years from all houses, so they'd be gone before the fire spread too far and the panic started. When Rebecca heard Peter doing the same thing, but with all students, Rebecca herself stopped to try and figure out why the fire had grown so much bigger than initially planned and why they weren't colored. The potions should have colored the flames blue and green, but they were orange, red, and yellow like flames tended to be. This fire she couldn't control. The teachers did their last attempts to put out the fire, and though they could decrease it slightly, they couldn't dream of extinguishing it. Lee spoke through the commenting mic. Every student calmly return to the Great Hall. Leave the stands. Panic didn't erupt. Many students had already left, and others were already leaving. They weren't fast enough for Rebecca's taste, and eventually she got annoyed that students' legs were hiding the fire from her sight. She climbed out from underneath the stands and watched the field more closely. A certain part of the fire was darker than the others, as if something was in it. Snape had noticed it too, and cast a spell to extinguish the fire once again. The something turned out to be a dragon, and not any dragon either. The majestic head of Tyrant Dragon was looking her straight in the eyes. He shook his head slowly, but he didn't lose eye contact with her even once. Then the flames engulfed him again. Rebecca didn't know if this was a shadow creature on a stroll or not, but inside she was certain that Tyrant Dragon wasn't a shadow creature. He was from the Dominion. Yugi had told her that the shadow creatures had been severely weakened after the puzzle was smashed, to the point where they were useless, while normally they could easily have withstood the magic of a regular wizard. The dragon, disapproving of her actions, had to be from the dominion of the beasts. They had finally decided that they too should have a say in the way things were playing out. It couldn't be anything else. Not many students had seen him, but those who had were all the more eager to get out. Snape looked at Rebecca with a frown, but he put his wand away. He couldn't do anything. He just sat down again and watched the course of events. He wasn't the only teacher who remained seated, although most headed towards the Great Hall. Umbridge was, to Snape's disappointment, still on the stands, and she too did not seem worried about being burned to a crisp, although she was clearly furious. Madame Hooch was hovering over the teachers' stands and had her arms crossed. She had chased the players away from the field and instructed them to get to the Great Hall. Not every player had, though. Rebecca could vaguely see Ron's figure through the flames looking at the goalposts he had been defending. She was pretty sure that this game counted as cancelled. Only very few students were left, mostly 4th and 5th years, who all knew who was the creator of this havoc. Many were pointing at her shamelessly and whispered her name in their hushed conversations. "Didn't I tell you?" Peter said when he found Rebecca staring at the dark spot in the flames. "You could have killed everyone here! The entire pitch will be destroyed! We've got to get out!" He sounded something between angry, worried, and heartbroken. Rebecca sat down and shook her head. "No, I don't think that is necessary." "Are you suicidal now, too?" he yelled furiously, feeling as if he had lost a friend, his closest friend. Rebecca smirked. "No, I still have things to do. I think that the fire is taken care of, though." She didn't look at him once. The dark spot was moving. Suddenly, the dragon shot up above the meter-high flames and roared loudly. Umbridge stopped yelling and instead just stared at the dragon. Shock was the overall reaction of every being present, excluding Snape and Rebecca. It circled over the flames twice, and then took off upwards, followed by the flames. Before Tyrant Dragon even reached the clouds, all fire was gone from the field and had gathered around him, only to be extinguished by the moisture of the clouds. The field was damaged greatly. All the grass had burned away and had left nothing but black, smoking stumps. The poles on which the south and eastern stands were built were all singed. All 6 of the goalposts were completely burned. One of them had collapsed under the fire, and one broke through the middle after the fire had disappeared. Most of the clothing decorating the stands in blue and bronze, or gold and red, were burned away completely, and those which were still hanging were black and smoking. In addition to that, it smelled an awful lot like sulfur, and the stands were covered in soot. It looked like a battlefield. Rebecca didn't even try to hide it was her doing when Madame Hooch flew over to her. She just remained seated where she was and sighed as the woman with the hawk-like eyes stepped off her broom. "Miss Hawkins, was this your doing?" Rebecca looked at her a second, then looked back at the destruction she had left behind. The dragon might have disagreed with her actions, but why then had he enhanced the fire so much? "She did it," Peter whispered, turned around and walked away. Rebecca was surprised. Then he had turned her in. He had said he wouldn't, so why had he? She wasn't angry, disappointed mostly. She looked after Peter, who turned around and met her gaze. "I'm sorry, Rebecca, but you've got to stop before you harm someone, including yourself." Rebecca laughed out loud and spoke up. "Ah, for me, Peter? How sweet!" Peter's expression turned to that of disgust. He averted his eyes and walked away. Dean, who had heard the conversation, shook his head with a frown and hurried after Peter. Dean had been pretty down ever since Tracy left. He didn't know that Rebecca and Tracy had a way of communicating. Umbridge walked up the stands where Rebecca was standing, together with Madame Hooch. "Such behavior is not tolerated at my school, Miss Hawkins," she said with a falsely sweet voice that made Rebecca want to do something that was even less intolerable. She was furious, devastated, and grieving all at the same time, and she was being pushed towards the limit. It's common for teenagers to have unstable emotions. Whoever had said that, Rebecca didn't know, but at the moment, unstable seemed to be a large understatement. It was more like a huge tidal wave without end, sweeping away all named common sense. Rebecca stared down at Umbridge. Actually, the woman wasn't much taller than Yugi, and her looks combined with her way of acting made her a rather disgusting person. She looked away, not being able to stand the sight of the pink-clad woman who, with such glee, had pronounced the destruction of a friend anymore. She sat down again and crossed her arms. She made the perfect picture of a stubborn teenager, but the fact was that a fire was burning inside her, a fire so strong that it made the blaze from before pale in comparison. Filch came hurrying up the stairs, too, with his whip in one hand. Rebecca wondered if Peter thought about that when he turned her in. She honestly doubted it. "My eye, headmistress, my eye," he said eagerly. She had been prepared for this, too, but she was just curious about what Umbridge would say. "No," the toad-like woman declared to Rebecca's surprise. She was pretty sure it had something to do with the look in Madame Hooge's eyes when she saw Filch's whip. "We are not allowed to punish students who don't go to the school anymore. Miss Hawkins, you are hereby Headmistress," a sleek voice yelled, and the owner of it walked up the stairs, too. The man was tall and blond, was holding a piece of parchment, and the look in his face was filled with glee. "They told me I could find you here. Every member of the Hogwarts Board of Governors and many parents signed this request to have Professor Yugi Moto removed from the school before nightfall." "Ah, Lucius," Umbridge said, unable to hide a smile. "Well, I suppose we go and tell them the unfortunate news." Umbridge wasn't sorry at all, though. The school was starting to form to her advantage. Fred and George were gone. Tracy had left with them, and she and Yugi would be gone before the sun set. The only one Umbridge had not been able to get away from the school yet was Hagrid, but that probably wouldn't last much longer anyway. "Miss Hawkins, I think you and Professor Muto can take the same train out of here. Go pack your bags. I'll contact your parents." Rebecca's fury blazed up even more, and she laughed out loud, sounding maniacal. "Did you forget, Umbridge? My last relative died at Christmas. Ain't it unfortunate?" Then she turned her gaze on Lucius. "I suggest you don't come along and tell Yugi the turn of events could be rather unfortunate. Sat Sujin Shah." Lucius stared at her, not understanding a thing, and right then and there, Rebecca felt capable of murder. Her hands shook. With those words, she stood up and walked away before she did something stupid, heading towards her dorm to gather the small amount of things she had brought with her, and to tell Tracy they were coming soon. She hoped that their little road trip to the Ministry of Magic that morning had been all right. She took the little book she had received from Fred and George. They had said something about this way of communicating being inspired from something rather freaky. For some reason, they had warned her for possession, and if she wanted to know what that meant, that she had to ask Ginny. Rebecca hadn't answered. "Are you there?" she wrote on a blank page, and like always, the text disappeared as soon as it appeared. "Yes. Raphael found him, talked with him for about 5 minutes, and then made an appointment with him. He's good," appeared on the page just long enough for Rebecca to read it before it disappeared too. "I know. He's done things like this very often. He'll accomplish something. I'm not worried about that," she wrote. "Is he there?" "I'll go get him," Tracy replied, and a minute later, "Okay, we're here." "Good. First of all, I was just expelled. Tonight I have to leave Hogwarts." Rebecca wasn't quite sure how Raphael would react to that. He knew that she had to be expelled, though. How else would she be able to help them? "What did you do?" Raphael wrote. "I burned down the Quidditch pitch during the Ravenclaw against Gryffindor game." There was a minute's pause, where Tracy probably explained to Raphael what Quidditch was, before anyone replied. It was a good thing that Rebecca could tell by the handwriting if it was Tracy or Raphael who wrote. "What?" was Tracy's reaction. "Wah!" Rebecca ignored that. "Second of all, Lucius Malfoy just barged in demanding that Yugi leave the castle before nightfall. We're leaving together, although Yugi doesn't know I'm expelled yet. I'm gathering my things right now." That was to be expected," Tracy wrote, somewhat slowly. "Can you pick me up at King's Cross Station?" Rebecca asked, feeling as if she had missed her ride from a party. "I'll be there," Raphael wrote, and with that the conversation was ended, although Rebecca knew she would have to tell a whole lot more on their ride home. Rebecca threw her stuff in her trunk and ran into Luna on the stairs. "That was no ordinary dragon," she stated. "What makes you think that?" Rebecca asked, annoyed by the somewhat overly attentive girl. Luna could really get her into trouble. "You got expelled," she said, and looked at Rebecca's trunk. "But that's why you did it. Why do you dislike Lucius Malfoy so much?" Rebecca just shook her head. "Greet Tracy and Professor Muto for me," Luna said, and walked past Rebecca, who just stood and stared at the girl. Then she gathered herself and ran down the stairs and out of the common room before someone could say anything. Then she changed her mind. She had to find Dean. He knew enough. Tracy had told Rebecca that. The great hall, of course, everyone was supposed to gather there. She hurried that way and put the book inside her coat. It was nice to be in regular clothing again rather than the school robes. She walked into the great hall together with the stream of other students, so she would not stand out too much. Discreetly, she hurried towards the Gryffindor table and handed Dean the book.
"Take good care of this,"
she whispered in his ear.
"It's the only safe way to take contact with either me or Tracy."
Dean just nodded.
"Thank you."
He often told Yugi that it was as if his life began the moment he solved the puzzle. Now he understood why. What would anyone be able to react to when they were in pure darkness without memories? Nothing at all. Now he had memories, a lot of them, and he had nothing better to do but to think about them. But for some reason his mind felt scattered. He couldn't get a hold over all of them. It was as if they somehow had disappeared. When Fudge had taken the puzzle from Yugi, Atem could still feel their bond, although he couldn't reach out to Yugi. The spirit was whole, and although he was trapped in his soul room in the puzzle, he felt at least like a human. Then everything was cracked, and everything shattered. The room, but also he himself. With a tearing pain, he had been ripped into something less than a soul. He was there, but at the same time he was not. He had forgotten how dark it had been. Unable to remember, he had forgotten the darkness. It was so dark. The shadows were nothing in compared to this. This darkness ripped and tugged at his soul, dividing it and putting it together again, just like his memories came and disappeared again. He knew that the puzzle was scattered. That's why he felt like he did. When the memory of Yugi telling him that it had taken him 8 years to solve the puzzle came, Atem got worried. He was glad when it disappeared from his memory again, though. When the memory of Pandora showed up when Yugi had solved the puzzle in just a couple of minutes, he was relieved just to lose that feeling when the memory vaporized. It was an odd state of existence, which he couldn't wish upon anyone. He did his very best to gather his soul and mind, but he couldn't, fighting to be free again, knowing it was pointless to do so when the puzzle was scattered. The moments he recalled that it was scattered, and it wasn't always that he remembered that it was pointless to try. Once or twice he tried to speak, but he had no body and no sense of time. He had no idea how much time had passed since the puzzle was taken from Yugi. It felt like an eternity. The memories of Yugi always made Atem smile. Every time they showed up again, he felt slightly happy. And since they were new, every time he never stopped to feel happiness and longing. At the same time, he never ceased to get scared every time his more darker memories appeared. Atem, Yami, he wasn't always certain about his name or which one was correct, even if he could remember both. Sometimes he couldn't remember either of them. He was at all times confused. At the same time, he felt constantly drowsy, as if he was about to fall asleep, not completely conscious. He wasn't always certain that his emotions were consistent with what he was supposed to feel. Sometimes he wondered if he was feeling angry when he was supposed to feel happy, and sad when he was supposed to be satisfied. He was always aware of one thing at all times, though, and that was that he wanted it to end as soon as possible.
Please let it end.